some reactions to Donald Trump's first couple days right now actually overstate what he's doing, what he can do, his actual powers, which strangely echoes Trump's own exaggerated claims. Now, look, immigration has been a challenge for decades in this country. Donald Trump's first term faced high migration, as did Biden's recently completed term, which is why President Biden deported over 270,000 migrants in 1 year. That was one of the highest, which surpassed recent records by not only Trump, but other presidents. So that's a lawful deportation power, which the most recent president used and which Donald Trump used and is using. Deporting people, even at pretty high numbers, is not, to say the obvious, not specific to this week of this new administration. And doing that alone, to be clear, factually, is not a, quote, power grab. Now, I'm saying that as a fact. If people who agree with or like the new president find that to be a positive thing, that's fine. In politics, we're well aware of all the different reactions people have, but that's just a fact. And again, the recent Biden administration did a lot of deportations, and we're now seeing promises to do that many or more. That's over here. Over here, vowing to potentially deploy the United States military in this country, or flatly breaking the Constitution or abusing federal powers to investigate, prosecute, arrest, or even jail local elected officials. Well, that's something else. Those are, as described and would be if enacted, abuses of power. And those could also be halted in court, just like what you see on your screen if you remember the moments of the past first-term Trump immigration plan, some of which overreached. Not in a sense of an opinion or in a policy sense, but overreached past what was legally allowed. And so they were ultimately changed, narrowed, and sometimes halted on an emergency basis in the courts. So right now, with that in mind, the distinction I'm reminding you of, Donald Trump, the new president, is pushing the line the most in two areas. Freeing those violent MAGA convicts, which is our top story last night, and we have more on that tonight. It's an extraordinary, and many police veterans say dangerous action. And in immigration, which has more direct opposition now coming to the forefront tonight on the ground.
Connecticut has never quit on people. We're never going to surrender, and I am never going to back down.
We are here to fight.
Fight.
You come for my people. You come through me.
Our 5-member delegation is planning to push back, fight back.
Presidents in this country have broad powers, but they are not kings.
We will now do ICE's job for them on a whole number of fronts. We're not going to do federal immigration enforcement.
If there is any attack on the Garden State or on any of its communities from Washington, I will fight back with every fiber of my being.
I have one message for President Trump. I'll see you in court.
Those are just some of the local officials who are speaking out, acting, and some of them Democrats there as well, vowing to deploy their lawful powers and protect their jurisdictions. We're seeing local hearings on lawful ways to deal with this new administration. Police chiefs reaffirming their roles and disclaiming any involvement with separate federal immigration plans coming out of the Trump administration. And California officials are working on how to manage what is now a federal government headed by an individual who is publicly vowing to deny much-needed emergency fire aid to victims in that state if the local politicians in that state don't join all aspects of the president's immigration plans.
Are you saying that California, if they continue to aid and abet law-breaking and harbor illegal immigrants, money from D.C. gets cut off?
Yeah, we're talking about conditions to this disaster aid. Look.
That's the speaker echoing what the president has demanded, conditions, which is very different from how this country has dealt with many other disasters wherever they may be, but we can say, since it's getting political, including in red states. Now, then there is the Constitution. And I'm going to, again, be as clear as possible. Presidents must follow the Constitution. The oath President Trump took on Monday, as other past presidents have taken it, you see there, is to, quote, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. That's required. That is binding. Yet on the same day that Trump took this oath Monday, he also issued a order flatly contradicting the Constitution. So let me go old school and read to you from a very old document because it's back in the news tonight. I am reading to you from the Constitution, which says all persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States. The privileges or immunities of citizens shall not be abridged. Pretty clear. It's the final word. Persons born here are citizens. And the Supreme Court ruled those words mean what they say. If you're born here, you're a citizen. That case was settled law all the way back in 1898. No politician can just change that in our system. Not Congress, not the president. And so if a president sort of writes on paper themselves or has their aides and lawyers write on paper if they disagree with the Constitution or that they even want to cancel part of it, that has no legal meaning. And anyone around government and law knows that. It's not expected that all citizens have to remember all this stuff or keep track of it, but that's how it works. That's our system, and that's just standard. A president could write down on paper or write an executive order which claims the First Amendment speech protection will now only apply to your supporters, not their opponents. Basically trying to cancel or change the First Amendment, right? And legally, that means nothing. That legally is basically what Trump did on Monday in one of his immigration orders, because he wrote down on paper he doesn't like the Constitution's citizenship definition, the one I just read you in the 14th Amendment. But you can go check in the Constitution, it's still there. You can go to the Supreme Court and check current law in the United States or any courtroom in America. Citizenship law has not changed since Monday. It's still what's in the Constitution, what I read you. It is not what Trump wrote down on Monday. If you're really curious, the case upholding that citizenship definition, quoting the 14th Amendment that I just read you, is from 1898, U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark. It has not changed. Not in law, not in a time machine. Now, Trump is vowing to start breaking that Supreme Court precedent and the Constitution next month. So this order is his way of laying down his plan that he's then going to break it and make some sort of federal effort to violate citizenship. And that will be tested in court. The Constitution says the privileges or immunities of those citizens shall not be abridged. So if the United States government under this new administration abridges those privileges and immunities with some of what Trump plans to do, denying people their paperwork or the citizenship benefits and treatment they would otherwise get, well, there we are. That's the conflict. Trump's announced a plan to violate that. And then the courts will decide. And so I told you I'd keep this clear. This is all how it works. Donald Trump writing that down on paper on Monday does not change the Constitution on Tuesday. Now, if you hear all that and you say, okay, I guess that's pretty straightforward, and you've heard about different administrations having policies go to court before, whether they're new, like an Obamacare law, or old, like a government taking a different position or disagreeing with the Constitution, it gets worked out in court. But if you're saying, I hear all that, news anchor, I hear that, Ari, but things seem to be changing, and what about this current Supreme Court? Well, fair. You'd be on to something when it comes to changes. The Supreme Court has changed some longstanding precedents, from presidential immunity relating to the coup, and that benefited Trump, to abortion rights, where they reversed 49 years of precedent. So they could do that again. I told you about an 1898 law. They could hear this case and change things. But again, this is still where we're at. And if they do that, that will be the Supreme Court. And there are many issues with the current Supreme Court, many questions about its nonpartisanship, its grifting, its potential corruption. We can report on all that. We have. But some people are describing all of this differently in these first few days for a range of reasons. Law can be confusing. Some forget the Constitution limits politicians' power. So a politician saying, I disagree with that part of the Constitution is meaningless. Also, there are people rushing to give Trump some sort of extra benefit of the doubt for almost anything he says or does right now that they don't give to other presidents. Our job here in the facts and evidence community is not to go any harder at this president than any other, but it's also not to somehow pull back from facts or evidence because of other external reasons, a sense that he is popular or that he has a lot of billionaire allies or any number of reasons. When a president drops an executive order that says the opposite of what the Constitution holds, anyone who's not just a total partisan or uninterested in facts is going to say, oh, okay, tell me something else. You could put out orders for every one of the Bill of Rights saying you disagree with them. So what? The Constitution's requirements in our constitutional system, in this constitutional system, are not changing right now. If and when the Supreme Court does something, we'll cover it, and the country will be governed by it, sure. But there is no reason that anyone should be hypothetically obeying in advance to a new Supreme Court precedent that we have not gotten. And Trump's team and his lawyers, they knew this order would go to court, and that's the other news tonight. It is going right to court. New cases brought by officials in over 20 states about the very real-world consequences and how to deal with a government that right now is taking the position that it can break the Constitution, and I guess hoping the courts of the Supreme Court will let them. So this is happening right now. And as I mentioned, some of the actions in the area of immigration, if you actually put aside the energy, the intensity, some of the partisanship, are actually similar to what we saw in the recently completed Biden term, even if sometimes neither of those administrations want to admit the overlap. Because immigration has been surging at levels we have not seen in a century, and administrations in both parties, even with differences of opinion, have surged the related deportations. That's one part. And then the other part can't be normalized and shouldn't be ignored. You got a sitting president who comes in, and the same day he takes the oath, he vows to contradict and violate the Constitution and Supreme Court precedent that's existed for over a century.